I sort of view it as like, you remember the old movie, I guess it's kind of old at this point, The Matrix, where at the very end, sort of Neo wakes up and he's not wakes up, but he's able to now perceive the Matrix and perceive all the green code that sort of makes up the world that he's been living in. I really see brand as kind of that way. Like if you pay attention to it as you're walking around, even today, if you walk around and you go to a bakery or you see a car pass on the street or you encounter a person, really be aware and be mindful of, okay, how am I reacting to that? What do I feel about it? And why do I feel about it? Is it the color that it used? Is it something about the typeface? Is it the sound it made? Does it happen to be where I encountered it? Is it something to do with my mood?
Hey, guys. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Andrew. Dr. Janet Hall is not here on this week, but I do have an amazing interview set up. I have Joe. He is a master at branding. He got me really excited about Amazon, all the stuff we've talked about with him. We're going to be talking about how to build a brand, what is branding, and the most important things about how to make a great brand and what that means for Amazon sellers. Joe has started out as an engineer and he kind of moved into the branding, and he has a really interesting story about why and how he moved into branding. And let's just go ahead and kick it off. Joe, why don't you give us a little intro and tell us what you do?
Hey, Andrew. Thanks for having me. So yeah, my name is Joe, and I live in San Diego, California. That's where we met. And my background, as you said, is actually as an engineer, a mechanical engineer, in fact. So I originally trained that way. But I kind of like to joke with my wife that I'm kind of the least mechanically inclined mechanical engineer on the planet, because I was never particularly interested in the super detailed aspects of the engineering when you got down to the spec level and had to decide, how big screws needed to be to hold things together. I didn't care for that part of it. But what I did find really interesting was kind of the design aspect of it, the design methodology, sort of working with customers, understanding what their problems were, and then designing a product that met those needs. So that really always energized me when I was studying mechanical engineering. And I found that kind of carried me through in my career as I started as an engineer, but then went into the software industry in Austin, Texas. So got involved in software products and was able to take the same skill of like design and how you bridge sort of what customers need with what the products actually have to provide. I was able to do that in software as well. So I really kind of consider myself a designer. And we'll probably talk later as I got into branding, but I see a clear line between kind of the physical products I used to work on as mechanical engineers and the brands that I kind of work on today.
Yeah, see, that's why I love talking to you, Joe, because I feel very similar to you in how I started out with the engineering background and then kind of moved into the design and how that kind of designing physical products and designing customer experiences. And so you're a person that really got me inspired about branding and designing customer experiences, especially with physical products. And can you tell us, like, where did you actually kind of make that switch when you went from a traditional engineer to an actual like designer and marketer?
Yeah, it was probably at a software company that I co-founded. It was the reason I came to San Diego from Texas. It was a company called Divx, and it made a really esoteric kind of low-level piece of video software, what's called a video compression codec. Codec stands for compressor decompressor. So it's how do you take all of the data that's in a video file, 24 or 30 frames per second of HD video, let's say. Every pixel is 24-bit color or whatever it happens to be. There's a ton of data in that data stream, and you have to compress it down to make it smaller so that it can be moved around and stored and transferred over the internet. So it's a pretty low-level piece of software. And I was not one of our engineers that wrote that code. It was highly technical, and we had like math PhDs writing it. But what I was involved in was kind of figuring out how to take what was this really low-level piece of software and turn it into something that people would sort of care about. And Divx, for those of your listeners that, maybe were in college back, in the early 2000s, it became really popular as a way to move movies and TV shows around and pirate them, frankly. That wasn't what our company was about, but that's how the software really took off. And that's really what it sort of made its brand around. And, you could look at it as a pirate brand, but I also kind of look at it as a convenience brand. Like, it was the first piece of software that kind of hit this sweet spot of maintaining high quality video, but doing it just a small enough size where it was practical over the internet speeds at the time to transfer it between people, to store them on servers so that people could get at them. And so it finally met the market need, product market fit. I think people talk about that kind of thing. And we got, we frankly didn't know what we were doing building the business, but we stumbled into a business model where the big consumer electronics companies like Sony and Panasonic and Samsung would actually come to us, and they wanted to build in support for our format into their products, so that DVD players, that sort of thing, so that someone could take their library of DivX files and actually play it on their consumer electronics products that were in their home theater. And we had a whole certification program that we set up. And once a product passed our certification process, they were allowed to display our logo or a little badge of our certification. So at the time we were putting this together, I was still kind of on the product side of things. I was our product manager, or one of our product managers, because we had some other products too that we built. But I looked at this business model that was kind of taking off, this revenue line, and I found it really fascinating as an engineer, particularly a mechanical engineer, because this was a product, I guess you could call it, that didn't really exist. It wasn't physical in any way. It was just this little logo. And yet people found it tremendously valuable, to the point that they were paying us, millions of dollars in licensing fees so that they could put this logo on their product. And that intrigued me. And I thought, what in the world is so valuable about this little logo that people are willing to spend so much money on it? And that kind of got me interested in brands. Ultimately, I learned about kind of what brands were, how they are kind of related to human psychology and human behavior, the importance they have in really everything that we do, whether it's commercial activities we take part in, things that we buy, to really, if you really want to kind of broaden the definition of what a brand is, even to our relationships that we have with other people. And I found it sort of fascinating. I found it something that I guess I'd had an intuition for and an aptitude for really kind of all my life, and hadn't really realized it. And so that really got me interested in it. And from that point forward, I kind of appointed myself as, since I was a co-founder of the company, I had some freedom in that regard. I kind of appointed myself our brand manager, or our brand director, and sort of took over ownership of that brand licensing program and how we presented ourselves to the world.
Wow, that is impressive. Yay. Wow. So I have a few questions for you. I'm kind of curious, I want to know your mindset. Why did you want to start a company? Why not just stay an engineer working for a big corporation and in a cubicle? Why did you start your own compression software business, branding business?
Yeah, there's a fairly mundane explanation for that, and I have a theory that behind every super successful company, there's a really boring, mundane origin story. It's just, that's usually not the one you hear in the press, because the company has come up with one that's a little sexier.
Yeah, a nice origin myth, right?
Yeah, exactly. My origin story is just that I co-founded it with some college roommates, and I honestly started working at the company, or made the choice to go and co-found the company, thinking, okay, we have some investment from investors. I'll have some fun working with my buddies in San Diego, California, and then we'll blow through all the money and the company will go bankrupt, and I'll move back to Texas and move back to the software industry in Austin and just continue doing what I was doing. And we came very close to fulfilling that prophecy. After we started, we had blown through almost all of our money, had no idea what we were doing. It was very, very close to kind of going into the ditch. And that's another theory I have of every successful company. There's multiple near-death experiences that they've had. But so we had our near-death experience, but we somehow managed to avoid it. And despite ourselves, succeeded.
Wow. What was the near-death experience?
Simply that we were going to run out of money. We had hired too many people. Okay. We had a huge burn rate. We didn't have any products that were generating any revenue. We were not running the company.
So traditional business practices, running, just gotta make a profit.
You need to have some business plan of what you're trying to do. And yeah, I think, maybe implicit in your question is this whole concept of kind of entrepreneurship, and why do you choose to be an entrepreneur, and why do you start companies? And that's a word I've always had a struggle relating to, because I don't know that I really do consider myself an entrepreneur. We'll probably touch on this a little bit later, but I mean, I find it interesting to start companies and operate companies, but some people are very passionate about creating companies, and that's kind of what they enjoy creating. I enjoy creating products and I enjoy creating brands, and you have to have a company to do that. But I'm not one of those that really gets up in the morning to go and create products. So I don't ever see myself as being this sort of quote unquote serial entrepreneur that starts 15 different companies. I mean, I'd much rather start a single company and have products that people love and just continue to do that the rest of my life. That's much more my speed.
Okay, yeah. So tell me, is that why you started an Amazon business? Do you like the idea of designing physical products? And you went from designing a special encoding software and branding it to developing physical products on Amazon. Like, is that why? Because you like just making new products and designing them?
Yeah, partially. There's a couple different threads that came together that brought me to Amazon. So I mentioned earlier that I sort of consider myself a designer, and then that's the through thread of all the stuff that I've done. There's obviously a design aspect to being an engineer and like figuring out what sort of products need to be built for a customer. So I started doing physical products when I was in school, but professionally was in the software industry. So I did that for software products, which is a bit, obviously less physical and more sort of ephemeral. It's sort of the software product doesn't really exist in a physical sense. And then I got into brands, which again, I found really interesting and found to be a really powerful asset for a business, and really sort of thought of myself as a brand designer, someone that designed brands. And that's even less kind of literal than even a software product. Now you're talking about this kind of ephemeral thing that's in somebody's head and the way they feel about something. So I was doing brand design. And so when I left Divix, I had some ideas of brands that I wanted to create. I wanted to design. And so I started a couple different small companies that were just me, because I kind of like to work on my own. And I had a set of products that I was creating. One of them was like a t-shirt company. And I was building them around a very strong kind of brand concept, brand identity. That was really what I was interested in. So the t-shirts themselves were not necessarily what the brand was all about. It was kind of what the t-shirts had on them, the designs, what they were saying. And it was this brand I was trying to build. And I did that, and I created these products, and we're really happy with how they turned out. I created the website. I was happy with how the website turned out. So I had the brand ready to go. And what I quickly ran into was, okay, now I have this great website, and like 10 people a day come to it, right? And I might sell 3 t-shirts in a month or something like that. And obviously, there's this other aspect of having a successful business, which is making sure people know about it and driving them to your website so that you can start to build a relationship with them and sell products. And what I discovered was that part of the business, I wasn't really passionate about that. Some people, God love them, I have a lot of admiration for them, are really passionate about that and really good at generating traffic. That was not my thing. So I was sitting on that experience and kind of looking at it and saying, well, here's this thing I built. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I've always been the kind of person that loves to take things from sort of like 99% good to 99.9% good. So this was something I created where I was super happy with how it had been polished and how it had turned out. And yet no one knew about it. And it was around that time that actually I came across Scott Volker's podcast, Amazing Seller, and started listening to it. This would have been in like the middle of 2015. So I think it was fairly early in his podcast history.
Yeah, that's right. He started the beginning of 2015. So that's about the same time I started listening to him too. I'm a big Scott Volker fan. The Amazing Seller podcast is his podcast.
Yeah, I think he's great. And the amount of free content that he's shared with the world is amazing. I mean, I think he deserves a huge amount of credit. So I kind of became aware of this Amazon business model. And to me, at the very beginning, not knowing a lot about it, what it seemed like to me was, well, here's an opportunity where I can focus on creating the product and making it really good the way I like to make it. The brand, the product and brand, I sort of see those as two sides of the same coin. And Amazon's got all the traffic. Like there are already people on Amazon buying stuff. So I don't have to worry about driving a bunch of traffic to my website to get people to hear about my products. I just need to learn how to essentially there's this huge river flowing by, and I have to figure out how to build a little water wheel and stick it in the river in order to get some energy out of it. And so that was what appealed to me originally about Amazon. That's how I got involved.
Yeah, that's I love that story because that's very similar to my story too. I one to kind of make products, and the whole driving traffic thing is something I've never been super interested in. I'm kind of more interested in it now just to build my business up. But yeah, I completely agree. I think Amazon's a great place for product designers to go. You need to be kind of like a C plus at marketing. And if you're a solid A at product design and C plus at marketing and at least a solid B at kind of like running a business, production and stuff like that, I think it's like an amazing place to be. So that's great. So I want to get a little bit more into branding and what it means and why it's important. And I want to specifically target Amazon brands. And so this is stuff that I can use, that something that you use, stuff that I can use, and of course, stuff that our audience can use. So you kind of touched on it before, that branding kind of like the ephemeral emotional appeal of a product. Maybe give us a little bit better definition of a brand or like kind of your working definition, what you consider to be a brand and branding.
Yeah, sure. And I'm glad you mentioned both those terms because I sort of see them as distinct, branding and a brand. One's a verb and one's a noun. But I should say that if your listeners go out and Google branding or brand, you'll find very similar content for both of them. So the terms are sort of interchangeable, and they're defined in a very broad way that's kind of similar. It's a real challenge if you just go out on Google and try to learn about branding because you're going to run into a ton of content that doesn't necessarily seem really relevant to how to get started. And so what I would say just at the start is I see it as something different than kind of what all the Amazon gurus out there will tell you to do. You'll hear the mantra, build a brand, build a brand, build a brand, which is true, but I don't think it's true in quite the way they mean it. As far as I can tell, when people say build a brand in Amazon context, really what they're saying is, well, build a portfolio of products that are under a common brand name, that have sort of a common set of customers. So if someone buys one of your products and they like it, it's easy for them to find other products that you make under that same brand name. And that is, I fully endorse that business strategy. I think it's a good business strategy, but that's not really building a brand in my sense, in the way I define it. So yeah, I really think of a brand as kind of the sum total of all the experiences you've had with a thing. It's sort of like the memories you have of it, this emotional aftertaste you might have of it. I mean, one example I like to use with people that seems to hit home is like think of your grandma, right? My grandmother is not in the room with me. I'm guessing your grandmother's not in the room with you right now. And probably there may be one listener out there whose grandma's sitting in the room with them, but for most people, the grandma is not. And yet we all, if you think about your grandma, your grandma is with you in some sense, right? You remember her, maybe what she cooked and maybe what her house was like, maybe what her house smelled like or sounded like, things she said to you. Your grandma exists in a very real sense, even if she's not physically there. And that aspect of your grandma that's not physical is in a very real sense, like that is the brand. Like that's the brand of your grandma. I mentioned earlier that you can, I think of brand as like a very broad definition that applies even to like interpersonal relationships. So some people, that's a little bit of an odd thing to say, like that your grandma has a brand. So if that makes you uncomfortable, you can just say, well, I have a memory of my grandma or how I feel about my grandma. That's fine too. But that is kind of the brand, like how you feel about something, what you remember about it, the sum total of all your experiences. And hopefully it's a positive one. Hopefully most of us have positive experiences for your grandma, but maybe there are people that have negative associations with their grandmother for whatever reason, but that's still the brand. And so that's really kind of what I think of as the brand is like, I try to get people to realize that there is this other thing that's not physical, and you have to be aware of it. You have to realize that not only does it exist, but that is the majority of the way that we interact with the things in our lives, right? 99.9% of the time you spend interacting with your grandma is with the memory of your grandma, not physically being with your grandma. And likewise, whether it's your wife or your kids or your job or even the product, like maybe you drive a Tesla car and you really like your Tesla car. The amount of time you spend driving the car versus the amount of time you spend thinking, God, I really like driving that car and isn't the Tesla great? You spend more time on the latter than you do on the former. So that aspect of a thing, which is kind of this emotional aftertaste or the way we think about it, is a super important thing that actually plays a real big role in our lives. And that's what I think of as the brand.
Okay, I love that. The grandma brand. I love that idea. I think that really kind of encapsulates the idea of a brand. I think that's a really good example. The whole concept and the feeling that you get of your grandma is kind of the brand. And so to allude to bring that to an Amazon product, your brand, whether you're marketing baby products or fitness products, the whole feeling and the attitude that people see around your brand and how it exists in the world and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit it just right. It's like in a business context, or especially in an Amazon context, the brand you're building is over the long term what people think of you, like what they think of your company, what they think of your products, how they feel about it. And so that's what you're building. And we'll talk about sort of tactically how that's a challenge on Amazon, because it's a little bit different than, say, like in a retail store where someone can walk in and pick up the product and look at it and feel it, and there are more touch points that someone might have before they buy something in a physical environment than online, especially on Amazon with some of the constraints they put. But the ultimate goal is the same. Peter Drucker, who's a kind of a famous business strategist, he has a quote that I really like, which is, he says, the purpose of business is to create and keep a customer. And I think of that as related to branding, because I think the way you create a customer and especially the way you keep a customer is you build a good brand. So I feel very strongly that whether you do it intentionally or not, the reason your business exists and its purpose is to actually build a brand. That's what you're doing.
Okay. Yeah, I love that. So tell me, we only have a certain amount of things that we can do on Amazon. We can control pictures, titles, descriptions, and basically the packaging and the emails we send to the customers. So tell me, how do we do it? How do we focus on this? And how do we build that emotional appeal, the grandma appeal? How do we get that through pictures and our packaging? Yeah,
it's a big challenge. And you need to kind of definitely work within the constraints that Amazon puts on you. I mean, I think of kind of creating a brand, it's sort of like 3 levels to it. And in my own head, I equate everything to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, probably, whether it's appropriate or not. So I sort of think of this as like a pyramid where the base is bigger than the next level up, which is bigger than the tip. But the level 1 of something is, you really have to have a reason to exist, a reason to even be in the customer's life. And that's really kind of the realm of sort of product market fit, of needs versus wants. Are you a vitamin, or are you medicine? All the kinds of things that you probably can read about on or hear about on product strategy blogs. Your product has to have some purpose. It has to fit some niche in the customer's life. Now, Amazon kind of makes that easy in a way, because we have these tools that can tell us, okay, we already know customers are buying, product X. So we don't have to spend quite as much time really trying to conceive of something brand new and hoping it sort of meets a need in a customer's life. We already kind of have this data that says, well, here is something that has a reason to exist in customers' life. We know that because a lot of customers buy this. And I'm either going to create my own version of that that's new and improved, or I'm going to create a product that's sort of an accessory to that or peripheral to that. But it's all anchored at this, like, does this product have a reason to exist? So that's sort of like table stakes. You have to have that. Otherwise, no one will ever buy your product and you won't be successful. Where
Sure.
I think people they sort of get that first layer done, and then they think, I'm finished. Like, I've got a good product, I'm done. But it's the next 2 layers where I think really great brands are made. And so the second level up is what I kind of call the reason to notice. Like, why is someone even going to notice you? Most of us, all of us, when we walk around every day, are exposed to hundreds of thousands of pieces of information and advertisements and everything, and we screen almost all of it out. Our brains are really, really good at this. And so the very first barrier you have to overcome as a seller, but especially as an Amazon seller, is to get people to even notice you. And there has to be something that's distinctive or different about your product, so that you can be, if someone does a search and they see all the search results and products on them, out of those search results, they're going to open, 3 or 4 or 5 tabs. They're going to choose 3 or 4 or 5 of those products to look at in more detail. You need to be one of those 3 or 4 or 5 tabs to have any chance of actually making the sale. So there has to be something in that search results page or the way that people are finding products on Amazon that stands out and makes you a little bit different and gives people a reason to even notice you amongst all the other products that are available on Amazon. And so that's, I think, an area where sellers, I see a lot of sellers, especially new sellers, they are so focused on the first level and the logistics of getting started, they don't ever think about this second level. And what ends up happening is you have search results that are filled with, dozens or hundreds of products that all look very similar, that all have very similar main images because everyone's following the same advice on their main images, that all have very similarly optimized product titles because everyone's following the same advice on how to optimize your titles. And what I'm here to tell you is that there is real value in just sort of zagging when everyone else is zigging. Like, you need to do something that makes your listing stand out. And if you can do that, then you're going to earn some clicks because people just want to check you out because you look different than everybody else.
Yeah, sure. Can you give us an example of a zag that you've seen or that you've done?
Yeah, I mean, so I have a product that I sell, and literally, for all intents and purposes, literally every one of my competitors has a certain kind of main image that's sort of a lifestyle image. It's a person using the product, and they all try to be a little bit different. Like, they have different poses, and one has a model with black hair, one has a model with blonde hair, whatever. But in the end, when you do a search, you just start deluged with this search results where you see similar looking people doing similar looking things with a product. It all sort of blends together as a potential buyer. So I very intentionally have created a main image that doesn't show a person, doesn't show a lifestyle. It focuses on my product and the packaging, which I've invested a lot in the packaging to have nice packaging. But the important thing is that it stands out. It's different. It immediately looks different from all the other things that are in the search results. And Amazon, unfortunately, with the data that they give us as sellers, it's a little hard to know for certain that that's having an effect. But I believe it is. I believe that a big reason that I've had success in that category, and I'm the top selling product in that category, is because I've deliberately chosen to be different in some key ways with my listing so that it stands out.
What happens when you're different and other people copy you? When you are successful, you attract other people who just kind of rip you off. So, do you then change again, or do you just accept? I don't know. What do you do? Have you had that problem yet?
Interestingly, for that particular product, no, which is really interesting. And I don't know why, because I've been the best-selling product in that category for a year and a half. And there have been others that have tried to copy other things of what I've done, like copy my packaging or copy copywriting. I kind of have a very distinctive personality in my copywriting. People have tried to copy that, but nobody's copied the main image for some strange reason. It's peculiar. But I mean, hypothetically, in answer to your question, I would say that's something you just sort of have to monitor. I mean, if you feel like your competitors are coming along and they actually are starting to kind of take some of your sales away, then yeah, maybe you do have to shift again and try to be different. But at least in my case, I've sort of staked out a position that's been pretty sustainable, even though others have kind of come at me and tried to copy a lot of the things that I'm doing. Honestly, I like to be a bit contrarian sometimes. I mean, I sort of have this theory that most people, there's a lot of people that sort of feel like they have a good eye for aesthetics and how to present things and how to design things. There's a lot more people that feel like they have that than actually do.
Okay. Yeah, that's good.
You will have people that'll try to copy you and they just won't do it very well. And they don't see it because for whatever reason, people have this blind spot. And even the buyers aren't necessarily conscious of it, I don't think. But I think it's non-conscious, subconscious level. It does come through to the buyers. Like, buyers notice products that are designed better, that are put together better, that where all the little details are sort of taken care of. That comes through to them unconsciously, and they can intuitively tell that one product is sort of higher quality than another, even from a listing if it's done well.
Yeah, I love that. I think that I completely agree. Joe, can you give us some examples of some good small brands that we can maybe emulate?
Yeah, there are a variety of ones that I like. They don't all necessarily sell on Amazon, but they will give you kind of an idea of what I think can be done by building a great brand. One of my favorite kind of notebooks is called Field Notes, fieldnotesbrand.com. And they've built a great brand around just little notebooks. And I mean, they're great quality products, but I really enjoy the product experience and the brand experience they built around it. And that's a great example, I think, of a place where, if you were thinking of getting into a product category, you might think, who in the world is going to create like pocket notebooks? Like, the world has enough pocket notebooks. But there's opportunity. You can do it in a different way. You can build a different brand. And that's what they've done. They've taken a nice quality little pocket notebook and they built a great brand around it. Another one whose brand personality I really love is one called Duke Cannon, Duke, and then Cannon, like the weapon. And that company makes like soaps and shaving gels, but it's kind of targeted towards men. But it's got this great brand image they built around, like Duke Cannon is, supposedly like some World War II era soldier guy. And they've done a great job of like building a real brand personality around what are at their core, like sort of commodity products like a soap. Your viewers are probably familiar with Cards Against Humanity. That's a game really popular, but I think it's underappreciated how different they were when they first came out. First of all, even starting with the name is kind of an odd, unusual name. The graphic design they used of I think they used Helvetica and just black and white. And everything's black and white. The whole idea of like a party game for horrible people. If you just think about all their positioning, it's again, if you're going to create a card game that people are going to play at a party, that might seem like a space that's got way too many competitors in it, but they found a way to come in with a whole different brand experience and be different. And I think it's great. Yeah, so those would be three that I put out there that I think are nice examples of like how you can take what really at their core is like not necessarily like, it's not like you're patenting and inventing some brand new thing, but they've taken something that people need and they've done it with a high quality product, but then they've built a great brand around it.
Yeah, those are great examples. I love Cards Against Humanity. And one thing I didn't know about them is that they, at least someone told me this, I need to double check it. They might be bullshitting it a little bit, but like, apparently the cards are open source. You can actually download them legally. And so they actually sell the card game is just a physical print of their open source questions, which like blew my mind. I don't quite understand why they did that, but for whatever reason, they did that. Did you see they did this whole kind of like China vacation thing for their Chinese suppliers?
Yeah, they paid for a whole month of production, but then sent all their production workers home for the holidays, which apparently is unheard of in China, that everyone just kind of gets a month off like that. So yeah, I mean, that tells you something about the values of the company and like, people behind the company. But it also, if you hear about that, whether you're a Cards Against Humanity player or even someone that hasn't ever played it before, like that is a building block in the Cards Against Humanity brand when you hear that story. And you think, okay, that's a company that's doing something I've never heard of anyone else doing before. It seems like a really cool thing. They must be a cool company. I'm going to check out their product. And it's just all part of, I think, I don't think they're doing it like in a manipulative way. I think they're doing it in a very authentic way. But it is a way where they're kind of building this Cards Against Humanity brand that's something much more than the actual product and the game itself.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of.
They've done some other. They did some other great stuff around the election. Like they had the Cards Against Humanity Saves America website, and they've done some really interesting public opinion polling. And they had this great thing. Everyone's politics are a bit different, but they were very opinionated back in the 2016 election with Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, and they had a website where you went and like on one side it was all blue and it was like I think you even bought like a blue pack of cards that was an expansion pack, and it was like, and down at the bottom it was like every all the profits from these sales will be donated to the Hillary Clinton for president campaign. And on the other side it was red, and it was like a red pack of expansion pack, and it was all wonderful. And this was sort of a game of like, well, let's see who can sell the most, right? Was it going to be the blue side or the red side? And so on the red side, it was like, you buy here, it's your vote for the red side, and you're going to get a red expansion pack. And then down at the bottom, like it wasn't hidden. Down at the bottom was like, all the profits from red sales go to the Hillary Clinton for president campaign. But it was just like again, it kind of, I think a lot about branding and brands is just like, it's about like imparting some humanity to these products and these companies that we build. Like we as people we have 100,000 or millions of years of evolution that teach us how to interact with other people and sort of read body language and read tone of voice and, build relationships with people. And then all of a sudden in the modern world, we have these entities like corporations and products that we interact with that are not people. And yet they sometimes play very important roles in our lives. But we have all that brain circuitry that is ready to go of like, how do I relate to this thing on a human level? And I think companies that build great brands, they add some of that humanity into their products and into their company. So you kind of can see, in a sense, the people behind it. And that makes us comfortable, because if you can imagine, like it's like the uncanny valley or something. Like if you met someone who seemed to be a person, but like had literally no personality and monotone voice and everything, like, it would be creepy, like, because that's not how people act. And in a lot of ways, it seems like, especially bigger companies, they seem to end up in this like lowest common denominator where we're not going to provoke any negative emotion in anyone. So we're going to be completely anodyne and neutral and gray. But that's just the kind of, people don't like that. It's on some subconscious, non-conscious level. So have some fun with your products, have some fun with your brands, like add some of yourself into your company. Don't be afraid of doing that, because other people the buyers who are people like that.
Yeah. Have you read the book Tribes by Seth Godin?
I haven't. I have it on my list because you've recommended it to me.
Yeah, I love that book. I should reread it. So Seth Godin, of course, the famous marketer guy, he talks about how people build and lead tribes. And it's really interesting. There's a lot of kind of similarities of why people get behind certain tribes, right? And he goes through these different groups of people. So there's kind of like ancient tribes, of course, are kind of, small groups of people, but what we really care about are kind of like modern tribes. They have people who are like all on the environmental tribe, and there's people who are all on the libertarian tribe, and even talk about like how communism was a tribe of people, and people who have like the organic movement. That's a tribe. That's such a tribe, right? And he talks, one of the characteristics of being a tribe is that you're a little controversial, and you definitely don't appeal to everyone. You have 90% of people say, nah, I'm not really into that. And 10% of people say, hell yes, I'm into that. And so he talks about like organic, right? Or non-GMO, whatever it is, right? Or maybe even some ones that are more negative, like the anti-vax movement, right? There's a tribe of anti-vaxxers, and they talk to generally mothers who have young kids and are worried, and they talk to that tribe. And so the cool thing is that they talk about how you have to kind of be a little bit out there and a little bit controversial and a little bit, you want some people to say hell yes. And like you said, having Cards Against Humanity, the fact that they donated both proceeds, blue and red, to the Hillary campaign, like they're obviously not like pro-Trump, and they're getting behind their tribe. Apparently they're appealing to the Hillary tribe.
Yeah. The way I sort of illustrate it sometimes is I really think of it as kind of like a yin yang symbol. Like if you kind of, compare that and or picture that in your head. And it's like for every negative reaction, there's an equal and opposite positive reaction. And it's kind of like if you're going to try to create a company or a product that never provokes any negative reaction in anyone, you are foreclosing, you're limiting your ability to create positive reactions in anyone, because you have to do things that you have to take actions that will not only be received positively by some people, but by doing that, they will be received negatively by other people. It's inevitable. Some people will react negatively to something just because other people are reacting positively to it. It's a completely contrarian sort of reaction. And so what happens is a lot of companies, because they're afraid of people feeling negatively about them or not liking them, they end up like taking that entire yin yang, and it's just like becomes this gray blob that no one reacts to at all. So yeah, don't be afraid of doing things that, piss people off, because in a way, like if you do something like that, you sort of found something. It might not be exactly the right thing, but you're in the neighborhood anyway of something that provokes strong emotions in people. And there's a high likelihood that there's going to be people that react positively to that thing, whatever you're doing.
Yeah. I always think of music stars like Justin Bieber. People who are in 40-year-old men usually love to hate Justin Bieber because like he's perceived as being this kind of young punk kid, right, with his flippy hair or whatever. And people complain like, oh, I think Justin Bieber's dumb, or I think I don't like this one thing. I don't like the Kardashians. I don't like this. I don't like that. I'm like, yeah, because they're not appealing. You are not in their market segment. They're appealing to 15-year-old girls. They're not appealing to 42-year-old men. And like that's a perfect example where they're building their tribe of young girls who like pop music, not some edgy 28-year-old hipster kid. I'm kind of curious. Another thing I've heard you mention a couple times is your packaging. And I think you've told me before that you hired professional package designers. Can you tell us a little bit about your packaging and why it's different and how you went about designing it?
Yeah, so I'll link that to kind of the levels that I was talking about earlier. Like the packaging plays an important role for me because it does help at this second level, which is being different and getting people to notice you. So that helps me there. But then the third level, the top level, is like to give people a reason to care about you. Like, so now they've noticed you and you've caught their attention. They're paying some attention to you. So now you have the opportunity to try to get them to care about you. And if you can get them to care about you, particularly if you can get them to care about you in a positive way, then you have started the process of kind of building that brand, that emotional attachment that people will have to you. And the packaging for me also plays an important role at that level for me because it's not just the aesthetics of the packaging that I designed. It's also the copywriting. It's the personality that I put in it. I've thought very deliberately about the unboxing process of like how someone's going to actually unbox the product. And I've tried to design into the packaging little kind of unexpected touches that trigger positive emotions that cause kind of delight in the buyers that open the product. And I've gotten dozens and dozens of 5-star product reviews that are really about the packaging. Like, I love the packaging. It was so cute. Or I really liked the packaging, because it said XYZ inside the lid of the box. And I thought that was really funny. And it's great that I'm getting that feedback. But to me, those are evidence that I'm hitting a nerve with those people. Like I'm actually starting to reach that emotional kind of connection with them. There's a reason now that they care about the product, that they care about the brand. But to your question of like how I did it. So I actually ended up doing a lot of the packaging myself. But the one part that I did outsource was I hired an illustrator, a graphic designer, to create some illustrations for me because I like her illustration style. And I did this for a couple of reasons. One, I found her illustrations to kind of just be aesthetically pleasing. But two, I wanted to have a very kind of distinctive look to my packaging and my brand. And everyone else that was competing was using photos of models in their packaging and in their documentation and everything else. And so I made a choice of like, well, I'm not going to use photos. Again, it's this zag versus zig. I'm going to be different. I'm not going to have photos. As an aside, it's very difficult to do photos well. I knew I didn't have the skill to like do the photos well enough, but I felt like I did have enough skill to like find a good illustrator and create good illustrations. And so I had probably, a dozen different illustrations made, how my product was used and different ways it could be used. And I included that in the listing and on the packaging and in the documentation. And so that was the element that I couldn't offer, but I could kind of do the rest of it of like, putting the title in a good font and creating good colors and that sort of thing. So I sort of knew where my limits were. But for those of your listeners that maybe feel like they can't do that aspect either, then I would say, you can find packaging designers that do the whole kit and caboodle, but you could also kind of split that up. Maybe you could find someone to just create a good overall look of the packaging for you, and then do something like I did, find an illustrator or someone that has a very distinctive kind of graphic design style to kind of add touches and little elements to the packaging in a distinctive way.
Yeah, I love that. One thing that I did is I used 99designs.com. Have you heard of that website? Yeah, I tried it. I wanted to see, figured, okay, package design we got done for like $50 on Fiverr, and it came out decent. And I also can kind of edit the files a little bit myself too. So changed a few things, and I thought, okay, it came out pretty well. But then I thought, okay, I'm really kind of ready to take my brand up a notch. And so I'm going to get much better professional packaging done. And so I started a contest. People who aren't familiar with 99 Designs, you set up a contest. There's like a bounty. So you set up $100, $500, $1,000 prize, and you kind of invite people to come compete with their different designs. And we ended up putting a $700, $800 bounty out there. And the nice thing is that with that kind of bounty, we got something like 25 different designs. And we can kind of, as they're coming in, you can kind of tell people like, oh, I like that one. I like that one. Can you change this one? Change this one. And they'll actually change the design while they're kind of the contest is running. And then you end up picking one designer or two designers and kind of like actually finalizing the design with them. And then they win the bounty. So it worked out really well. And the nice thing is that you don't have to have any professional skills with Illustrator or Photoshop or any of that type of stuff. You don't even have to know how to load a file. they can do all that stuff for you. So that's a thing that's really nice. So I agree with you that having the skill to change it yourself is really nice, but it's also very easy to just contract that stuff out. So one thing I'm kind of curious, Joe, I love reading books, websites, podcasts, anything. Are there any books or websites out there that you suggest that maybe me or the listeners can read to learn a little bit more about branding?
Yeah, I think from a kind of what a brand is and how it can relate to your business. Two books, they're both by the same author that I really like because they're short. They're by an author named Marty Neumeier, and one's called The Brand Gap, and the other is actually called Zag. I've talked about zagging versus zigging. He talks about the same concept in that book. And they're both short reads. They're both easy reads, but they pack a lot of information in them. I think those are two great books to get started. I don't have a lot of podcasts or websites that I read about branding because honestly, I find it, I don't know. I have this kind of interesting relationship with brands because I love them and I feel like they are essential and there's something fundamental about them. But there's an industry that's been built up around brands and branding, like people that kind of do it professionally and have agencies that do it, where I think the work they do is fantastic. But when they're all creating this content and they need to have stuff for their blogs or podcasts or everything, they feel a need to like over intellectualize it and sort of talk about it endlessly in various ways. And so I tend to find podcasts and websites about branding a bit boring and interminable. What I would advise, instead of going and reading about brands and branding, try to learn about human psychology and why people buy things. A great book on how people think and make decisions is Dan Ariely, Ariely. He's written some great books on that. Predictably Irrational is his first book, but he has other great books. And it sort of talks about how people make decisions in ways that don't really seem rational, and why do they make the decisions that they make that way? And we all do this, and that's really, I think, if you're going to be successful as a business person, you need to really understand why people are making decisions the way they are, and it's not entirely rational. It is. There's a very heavy emotional component to how we make decisions, and brands are sort of the assets that exist in that emotional realm. Like if you can think of your product as the physical thing that's sort of rational and does X, Y, and Z, and here's how we measure exactly what it does. Well, the brand is the complement that exists in that kind of emotional realm that people use to make decisions. And it's really important if you learn about that, is like emotions are a key part of how we make decisions.
Great. That's a great suggestion. That's going to the top of my reading list for sure. So I guess another question I'd like to ask everyone is what kind of other tools you have that you use all the time that you love that aren't necessarily related to branding that you just use to run your Amazon business?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be super nerdy here for a minute. I love TaxJar. I think it's one of the best services that are out there for Amazon sellers. Not only does it fill an essential need, I think, which is to keep your business sales tax compliant in the US, which I would strongly urge everyone to do. But it's just a really well created service. Like it's really well done. And yeah, I would definitely, I've tried to be, the way I've approached sales tax from the beginning is I made sure I registered in my home state, which is California, which is one of the most notorious ones to go after sellers elsewhere. So I kind of lucked out in that regard. But then every so often, I kind of triage my sales and I sort of use the Pareto principle, and I try to look for the 20% of states that are incurring 80% of my sales tax liability that I'm not yet registered on. And then I sort of just register in tranches. And I've gone through, I think, 2 or 3 of those. And now I'm registered in, 14 or 15 states. But TaxJar makes that really seamless. And I think it's a great service. I definitely use Adobe's Creative Suite. Your mileage may vary there as how well you could use Photoshop and Illustrator to just do little touch-ups and things like that. I think Jungle Scout's a great product. I know you're a big fan of that also. One that's a little off the wall, if you're a Mac user, Keynote is Apple's presentation software, but it's actually a really great like vector design tool also. And if you're creating like little infographics, or you're creating sort of a secondary image that maybe has a table that shows things about your product and how it compares or its dimensions or something like that, Keynote is, I found, a great way to do those sorts of images pretty quickly if you're not like a trained graphic designer that knows how to use Illustrator and design. So I would urge people to check out Keynote as well.
Great. Those are great tips, Joe. I like those tools a lot. I think every single tool that you just suggested. So I highly agree with everything you just said. So I'm just curious, is there anything you want to leave us with? How can we get a hold of you? Any parting advice? Anything else you want to say to the audience?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I would just really encourage everyone to kind of think about brand and think about it as a sort of a real asset that you should be building. I sort of view it as like, you remember the old movie, I guess it's kind of old at this point, The Matrix, where at the very end, sort of Neo wakes up and he's not wakes up, but he's able to now perceive the Matrix and perceive all the green code that sort of makes up the world that he's been living in. I really see brand as kind of that way. Like if you pay attention to it as you're walking around, even today, if you walk around and you go to a bakery or you see a car pass on the street or you encounter a person, really be aware and be mindful of, okay, how am I reacting to that? What do I feel about it? And why do I feel about it? Is it the color that it used? Is it something about the typeface? Is it the sound it made? Does it happen to be where I encountered it? Is it something to do with my mood? But be aware of how you're reacting emotionally to the world around you. And you start, that's the green code of the Matrix. You start to kind of see that emotional layer this plays a huge role in how you make decisions and in how you guide through your life. And once you start to see that, once you're more aware of it, you will be a much more effective business person and you'll be a much more effective Amazon seller because you'll realize the products I'm making are going to kind of fit into that emotional layer in people's lives. Like there needs to be something about them that causes them to be noticed and causes them to make an impression on people. And you'll kind of approach your Amazon business in a different way. Like there's a lot of talk about how Amazon there's so many products and opportunities over and it's flooded with all kinds of things. But I'm a firm believer that there's huge opportunities in almost every space to create different kinds of brands. There may be very similar products in those markets, but that's an opportunity for you because when there are 1,000 products that all look one way and all sort of fit in one box, if you create something that just stands out and fits in a slightly different box, all of a sudden you're competing with one. You're the only person in that box. And there's a lot of markets and a lot of niches in Amazon where there's sort of a wide open blue ocean when you look at it through the brand lens. Yeah, as far as me, if everyone would like to kind of check out my website, see some of the things I've written about brand, it's bezbrand.com, bezbrand.com. And I'm Joe Bez on Twitter, but there you'll mostly see me ranting about U.S. politics. So whether you're interested in that or not. But yeah, those are probably two of the best ways to get a hold of me.
Great. Thanks, Joe. I really appreciate your time. And I learned a lot. And I know our audience will have learned a lot too. Thanks.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Andrew.
Guys, we love reading reviews on iTunes. I love this one right here from Dusty D. Dusty D wrote, "Real world material!" ! Thank you, Dusty D. He says, "The podcast is great for anyone who sells on Amazon or is starting out or who wants to be big. Great tips and tricks as well as things to avoid while selling on Amazon. Coming from a first-year seller, I've already learned so much! 3 exclamation points. I even put advice given by Andrew and Allison in my recent Craigslist ad to find a great freelancer photographer for my Amazon products. Thanks so much for the great content. Look forward to being on the show one day." All right, Dusty D. Yes. Thank you for leaving us a review. Very excited you found some value, found some real actions there on how to hire people. And also, yes, I would love, let's get you on. Let's get you up to the point. Do you have a good story to share? Bring it to me. Everyone else, please, if you found some value in this podcast, I would love if you could go share those reviews, some of that insight you found from this podcast. Go ahead and go to iTunes and leave us a review. If you have your own podcatcher, your own way of listening to this content, you can still go to iTunes and leave a review. If the platform you're on also has a review platform, review us there too. So thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. Review from iTunes from Hello World. That's the name of the person. Hello World. Hi, Hello World. Motivating and no BS. Andrew has a unique ability to both motivate you and reassure you to start and grow your business. Very helpful. Thank you, Hello World. Thank you for that iTunes review. If you have not left an iTunes review, I would greatly appreciate it. Just go to iTunes, find the podcast, leave us a 5-star. If you want, you can leave a review. If you want, just hit those 5 stars. It really helps people find the podcast. Just like an Amazon product, iTunes also needs these product reviews too.